Welcome and thank you for being here. I'm Kimberly Hokinson, Director of Annual Membership Programs at the MFA. We are delighted that you could join us for tonight's lecture, and we appreciate your support. This program is coming to you virtually from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Founded in 1870, the MFA stands on a site which has long served as a place of meeting and exchange among different Algonquin nations, including the Massachusetts. As a museum, we acknowledge the long histories of the land we occupy today and seek ways to make Indigenous narratives more prominent in our galleries and programming. Before I introduce our speakers, a few logistical notes. A transcript and closed captions are available during this program. To enable closed captions, go to the bottom of the Zoom window and click on Show Captions. During the presentation, please use Zoom's Q&A function to ask questions. And please note that this lecture is being recorded and will be available on the MFA's YouTube channel next month. And now I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Edward Saywell has served in many roles since joining the MFA in 2006. He is currently the chair of Prints and Drawings. Marina Tyquiengco joined the MFA in 2020 and is the Ellyn McColgan Associate Curator of Native American Art in the Art of the Americas Department. Edward and Marina, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Kimberly. Have a day, and hello, everyone. I just wanted to welcome and acknowledge any Indigenous and Native visitors we have in the audience. Thank you for being here tonight. We are so excited to talk about Marking Resilience, Indigenous North American Prints, and I will hand it over to Edward.
Thank you so much, Marina. Hello, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you tonight. Marina and I are really excited to talk about the exhibit Marking Resilience, Indigenous North American Prints, which highlights our growing collection of contemporary prints by Native American and Indigenous artists. Marking Resilience is on view until March the 17th in Gallery LG26, our Roberts Gallery, which is on the lower ground floor of the Art of Americas wing. And if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, we very much hope that you will have an opportunity in the not too distant future. There will also be a companion Indigenous print exhibition opening in May in the same space on a different theme, this time ancestors and place. So today I'm going to give a little bit of context for the project, and then Marina and I will take you through some of the key artists and works that are featured in the first iteration of the exhibition, which opened in November. And at the close of this evening's talk, Marina is then going to give us all a sneak preview with just for one slide to the second installation that is focused on ancestors and place. So why this show now? Until very recently, our collection of prints by Native American artists was quite slight. We had a number of Inuit prints, many of which were actually exhibited a few years ago in an exhibition in the Art of Americas wing. But beyond that, we have actually had relatively few works and little diversity in terms of geographic regions or artists. Here, though, are some exceptions to that, or rather, in fact, works that also helped us to think about how we build this small collection out. A print by Fritz Scholder, a work by Dyani Whitehawk that you're going to hear more about later, and a really wonderful Wendy Red Star print that will be in the exhibit Ancestors and Place, opening after the current show. So in 2022, we set out to change this by defining a specific strategy on Native American and First Nations printmaking, defining it actually as a top priority of the Department of Prints and Drawings collection strategy, working in full partnership with Marina and our colleagues in Art of the Americas. We launched the strategy with the acquisition in December 2022 of 53 works from Crow Shadow Institute of the Art on the Umatilla Reservation near Pendleton in Oregon. It's one of the most renowned printmaking studios in the United States, and it's the only professional printmaking studio on a Native American reservation. Print shops such as Crow Shadow are where the magic of printmaking happens. If the artist is new to printmaking, then working at a studio like Crowshadow is an incredible opportunity for them to learn about printmaking, perhaps be introduced to new and different techniques, sometimes even push them to begin to rethink their own practice. And the bottom line is that it's always an incredible opportunity to work in collaboration with a master printmaker who can bring quite literally to the printmaking table all of the technical intricacies of the printing process, so that the artist has the freedom to concentrate on making the image itself, to bring to fruition their vision. So in recent months, we have continued to broaden our holdings with works from other print shops besides Crowshadow, print shops from across the country, underlining how printmaking has long been a key medium for Native American artists, with printmaking's principles of collaboration, reciprocal learning, and communal activity resonating really strongly with the similar values held by North and by Native American communities. The prints we've acquired embrace everything from figuration to landscape to abstraction, an array that really challenges common stereotypes, common assumptions, and all too often misconceptions that Native American culture is monolithic and oftentimes de-individualized. The artists in both iterations of our exhibition are those whose works reflect both the diversity of the broader contemporary art world, but whose work also speaks powerfully to many issues that resonate strongly in Native American communities, especially those of what we might call cultural resistance and persistence, other themes of history, memory, and the environment. Over the course of this evening, we're going to focus on a few works in the exhibition and their artists that showcase the notion of resilience in many forms. And I'm going to start with Jeffrey Gibson, a member of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians and of Cherokee descent, an artist whose work the MFA has actually had a long and strong commitment to. He was recently announced as the artist who will represent the United States at the Venice Biennale in 2024, one of the most prestigious biennales in the world. And Gibson will actually be the very first Indigenous artist to have a solo exhibition in the United States Pavilion. Many of the reasons that were given as to why he was chosen for Venice are the ones that have drawn myself, Marina, and other past and present colleagues to his work, namely the ability to connect with both his own culture and with different ones and different communities, to bring people together while at the same time doing so through a very critical lens, looking at the history of the United States. At its heart, Gibson's work is based on the identities that he doesn't see as being celebrated at the national level. It's work that fuses together, in many respects, American, Native American, and queer perspectives. In a recent interview, he described how for Indigenous histories, quote, "There's this gap historically about these histories existing on the same level and being valued culturally. My goal is to force them into the contemporary canon of what's considered important." In short, he wants to underscore that Native people exist, are present, and contribute, and that for artists who are not in the mainstream, that they are not pressured necessarily into conformity, to mold their work to mirror and to match that of the cultural mainstream. The two works on screen right now are really interesting pieces that have, on the left, long been in the collection, and on the right was actually performed here close on 10 years ago. The work on the left, Document from 2015, is indeed exactly what it looks like. It's a full deer hide pegged onto the wall with steel pegs. And some of you may actually have seen it installed at the MFA. The very precise abstract geometry within the wonderfully free-flowing lines of the deer skin is striking in contrast to the hide itself. whereas on the right, a performance piece at the MFA in 2014 was one in which Gibson choreographed a conversation between himself, a therapist who is is outside of the photograph, and Jackson Pollock. The latter mediated through both a bowl that we own of Jackson Pollock's and a painting by Jackson Pollock that you see. And he also introduced in the performance piece an ancient bowl from ancestral Pueblo culture. We'd been looking for a work on paper by Gibson for some time, and as soon as we saw this work, the bright, dazzling, vibrant print with fire and say a prayer written so powerfully and evocatively across it, we knew we had to have it for the collection. And here you see it installed in the exhibition itself. And here it is in close-up. It really is a vibrantly amazing work. And it's also one that pulls from a wide array of sources and different cultures, including Indigenous North American ones. So, for example, the striking patterns of triangles across the work's background are actually inspired by the bold, colorful geometric shapes that adorn parfleche, flat, folded, rawhide cases that were used by Indigenous peoples to transport personal belongings and trade materials. Oftentimes, when we think of abstract works, we think of them as being non-representational, yet the parfleche's shapes, patterns, and colors oftentimes have specific meanings and symbolism to very particular tribes and their owners. And the work itself was specifically a response to the civil unrest connected to the racial disparities exposed by the coronavirus and the murder of George Floyd by police officers in Minneapolis in May 2020. The work is also, in its energy, in its rhythm, reflective of Gibson's love of pop culture, especially club and dance music. And before I move on to the next work I'm going to talk about, I just want to finish with some wonderful words of Gibson's. I quote, "Remain humble, understand that we are very powerful beings with the capability to manifest circumstances greater than ourselves. Time moves on independent of us. With hard work, we can influence what comes in time. Be generous." One of the most striking prints, and one of my favorites in the exhibition, is Julie Buffalohead's Tone Death. And here I'm showing it installed on its own wall in the exhibition, and here in close-up. Julie Buffalohead is a Minnesota-based artist and a member of the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma. And she has described how her work often represents dichotomies, something that she personally relates to as representing what she describes as the two sides of herself, the two cultures that she comes from, and the intermixing of those. But equally, dichotomies that speak to native philosophy, which oftentimes doesn't see things in black and white, but nuanced in gray, and that each of us may oftentimes not be just one or the other, but a mix, a blend. In her work, she often delves into her tribal stories and traditions, using metaphors, iconography, and storytelling in her artwork to present American Indian experiences, ones that extend back to how her own tribe, the Ponca, originally from northern Nebraska, were forcibly moved in 1876 off their lands to Oklahoma. To tell her stories, Buffalohead often uses animals in her works as her subjects, and her prints such as this, or her paintings, or her drawings, or her bookmaking, or her sculpture, oftentimes have a slightly whimsical and an illustrative quality. And in many, it's the coyote, a mythic symbol of wisdom and cunning, who is her main protagonist. The coyote, a trickster figure drawn from traditional native stories, both a creator and a destroyer, understood to be inherently neither good nor evil. In Buffalohead's own words, quote, "The piece stems from recent events, specifically the COVID pandemic and the politicization of the epidemic. The two coyote figures exist in a suspended space in which they are mirroring each other, sentient and vulnerable. They are representative of groups that are polarized in the United States, who are validating their own worldviews within a narrow vacuum. The coyote at right holds up a mask that reads help, referencing the pandemic's disproportionate impact on Native American communities, members of which died from the virus at more than twice the rate of white Americans. The opposing coyote on the left brandishes a placard that says "Tone Death," and is patriotically covered with American flags, a reference to how many people who ignored mask mandates argued that it imposed on their individual freedoms and constitutional rights. In Buffalo's own words, "I was interested in exploring this lack of conscientiousness toward other people who are at risk. Framing this into my own context and setting up a drama of flag-like proportions, I referenced the cartoon antics of Wile E. Coyote of the Looney Tunes to literally hold up a sign, provoking conscious action. The pandemic has demonstrated that no one is immune. We are interconnected." And I think the work is an incredibly striking image for the moment that we are in, an image of the stakes that are at play with the increasing polarization of American politics and increasingly partisan animosity. Turning now to Andrea Carlson's large print, Exit, which you can see on the freestanding wall here, and here in close-up, Carlson has also talked very powerfully about the work Exit, a piece that she made, like Julie Buffalo, at the High Point Center for Printmaking in Minneapolis. Her own words also pick up in a very interesting way on the power of printmaking for her, a medium that allows for multiples of the same work to be made. Carlson has said, and I quote, "Exit is related to my other works because it picks up on themes of land and impositions of colonial narratives and erasures. I took on some different content for the prints because they are made in multiples, so that they have the ability to be displayed in more than one place at a time. There is something resilient about that, whereas painting seems more vulnerable. Since one of these images can be in more than one place at a time, I wanted the content to reflect that resilience of propagation. I made them to be sigils that work against loss and scarcity, using the multiple to promote the idea of a robust and plentiful culture. There is an indigenous fear of losing out of things and cultures. These prints address that fear." And much of Carlson's work rails against the displacement, against the forced migration of the shadow histories and the incredible cultural losses that have massively impacted Indigenous communities. And Exit focuses on this destruction by addressing the defacement and the razing of ancient effigy mounds throughout the upper Midwest. Wisconsin has more effigy sites than anywhere else in the world, but many thousands have now been destroyed, plowed over by settler farmers, lost to looters, or more recently, lost to road construction. Dating from between AD 750 and 1200, the mounds are unique to a small area of the Midwest. Thousands, as I've said, many shaped like animals and birds have now been destroyed. And at the lower center of her print, Carlson depicts the most famous anthropomorphic shaped effigy mound to have survived. In fact, it's the only anthropomorphic shaped effigy mound, commonly known as the man mound, to in fact survive. And the man mound, originally 214 feet long, was also partially destroyed in the mid-19th century, the lower parts of its legs leveled for road construction. And as you can see in the photograph on the left, those legs have been effectively reconstructed using the white. Although the man mound is today protected as a National Historic Landmark, many native cultural practices continue to be threatened. In creating this print as a sigil or a symbolic marker for those traveling along I-94, the interstate which connects the Great Lakes and the Northern Great Plains regions, where many of the mounds had once existed, Carlson hopes to call attention to the continued loss of native culture. Beside the image of the man mound, either side of the exit sign on the print, are the mica hand talons of the Mississippian peoples, depicted in overlapping purple and yellow. The two disembodied hands signing exit emerge from the bent trees which act as trail markers, created at mound sites by tethering saplings to the ground. These are used by Carlson as directional markers, both in reality and in the print, used here to lead the viewer to the area in which the mounds float, guiding your eye up to the prominent red exit. And I'm now going to hand over to Marina.
Thank you, Edward. So kind of moving more to the personal, or I guess the bodily, one exciting aspect of this collecting initiative has been that we've been able to acquire significant works by artists not part of the collection, including those who work in performance and photography in many different mediums. James Luna is a very prominent Luiseño Ipi Mexican performance artist who's best known for the piece on the right, which is from 1987 to 1990. It's called Artifact Piece. And Luna in this piece put his body on display to comment on how Indigenous peoples were often represented as artifacts in a historical past and not connected to living peoples, particularly in museums. Luna passed in 2018 and was for decades a mentor and friend to many Indigenous artists. And this provocative piece is for many an introduction not only to Luna's work, but often the only piece of Indigenous art that is in a mainstream contemporary art class or a performance art class, just because of its significance. And it really also points to the way that Luna blends performance, stereotype, a sense of humor, and reflects on the strangeness of how Native peoples have been poorly portrayed and spoken about historically. And on the left, of course, is his work in the series that I'll talk more about. In Luna's own words, one of my subjects is ethnic identity, how people perceive us and how we perceive ourselves. Not everybody can talk about that, so I guess that makes me a dangerous character. And I think it's also just fun to point out that Luna came about, or his practice kind of flourished in the 1990s when there was a real strong sense of multiculturalism and an emphasis on kind of happy multi-ethnicity. And I think he challenged and questioned that in a really wonderful way. Marking Resilience actually has 10 works by Luna, and they were all brought in as part of our wonderful collecting initiative. 8 of them are part of his Sumo Jazz series, which you see again on the left. And I love this title. Again, he's kind of playing with us and the viewers. He was listening to a lot of jazz in 2010 when it was created, and also was interested in historical images of Japanese sumo wrestlers. So rather than talking about the whole series, Sumo Jazz 9 and 15 give you a sense of the larger body of monoprints, meaning they're prints, but each image is unique. They have a strong color, and they also have a wonderful photo album aesthetic with smaller sets of these photographs. And if you can kind of look closely at them, these images were actually created by Luna, photoshopping himself into historical images of sumo wrestlers. So again, you see that emphasis on kind of ethnic and racial play. And the wrestlers wear mawashi or loincloths, traditional Japanese sumo wrestler attire, while Luna wears a man's apron or kilt that's specific to his Luiseño identity. And also, if you can kind of get a little closer, you can see that he sometimes is holding feathers as well. The jagged geometric forms at the top and bottom of this orange print relate to basket patterns. And resilience is shown in this insistence on specific cultural aspects like Luna's kilt and basket patterns while creating an entirely new image, jamming cultures together. What I particularly love about these works of the series is that they present a kind of imagined photo album, a cross-cultural moment of Luna with Japanese sumo wrestlers. Looking at the individual prints, we can also see this emphasis on mark making. As an artist known mainly for performance, who often worked in photography and installation, mark making and experimenting with mediums on a surface was not really something for which Luna was known. And there's something so lovely and painterly about this series, Sumo Jazz. You can kind of feel the musical influence in some of the way that he makes his marks. So with this acquisition, we get to present a work by a well-known artist that on the one hand, he's something he's very well known for, exploring racial and ethnic play and stereotype. And on the other hand, a very new aspect, his sense of design and composition on a two-dimensional surface. Tyquiengco Lakota artist Dyani Whitehawk won a MacArthur Fellowship last year, and I like to kind of point out the section where Jeffrey Gibson is, as well as the kind of MacArthur Alley, where we have two really wonderful, exciting Native American artists in close proximity to each other who have had this major recognition. Whitehawk is a graduate of University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Institute of American Indian Arts. She's a painter and multimedia artist known for her large-scale abstracted paintings and beaded pad pieces that reflect specific Lakota aesthetic traditions. Whitehawk recently visited the MFA on the right as the Ruth and Carl J. Shapiro Lecture Series presenter. She was the first Native artist and the first Native woman artist to give this prestigious lecture. Whitehawk's education before her MFA at Wisconsin was mostly at tribal institutions, and her approach to art has always been from a Native perspective. She was inspired and is inspired by Lakota women's making, practices such as beadwork and quillwork, using softened porcupine quills to create elaborate patterns on a variety of items like bags and clothing. The forms on Lakota art often appear abstract, but represent specific cultural ideas and items. Whitehawk recently explored performance as well in 2020 and created a piece called Listen, which explores women speaking their Indigenous languages. And this series takes care of them is a bit more figurative than most of Whitehawk's practice. And you saw a little bit of a preview of this at the beginning, but from this image, I hope you can get much a better sense of what these images are. Dresses. They are specifically wool dresses made from the 19th century and on to today. Wool came to Lakota communities through trade, and they are adorned with shells, buttons, and ribbons. As I mentioned, she's influenced by the roles Lakota women play in society and in their families. Takes Care of Them is a wonderful example of this emphasis. Each print represents a different female relative, and the Lakota titles reference the kind of care that this woman does for her family and community. The first is the grandmother figure. It is a simpler form, more closely resembling 19th century dresses, and the translation of the title lead demonstrates the respected role of elders. The next, is create, and I love the idea of creation as care. This is the yellow dress. Whitehawk describes this dress as blingy, and in person it has more of a goldish tone with several layers of ribbons, and it's kind of a young aunt figure. And the green dress, Nakichize, means protect. The small white symbols at the bottom represent dragonflies, which are symbolic protectors. And this word was a bit more familiar to me just because of the recent history of the Dakota Access Pipelines, where Nakichize, or protect, water protectors, was really kind of in the zeitgeist a bit more. The red dress, Nurture, represents the mother figure and has a particular resonance with Whitehawk's own mother, Sandy Whitehawk, a Native veteran and adoptee who was taken from her community as a child. More Native Americans per capita serve in the armed service than any other demographic group, and veterans are honored in powwows. The elder Whitehawk has been part of these veteran honoring ceremonies. And the stark colors and contrasts of this series also relate to those specific roles for veterans. You might be wondering, after looking at and thinking about all these dresses, what kinds of materials they would be made from besides the wool. The large white yolks of the dress, the upper part, are a specific type of shell, dentalium shells, which actually come from the West Coast. They were a prized material for adornment prior to colonization, and so I love thinking about their continued use and how it represents deep and rich pre-colonial trade networks, because the Lakota peoples are in the Midwest, and all of these shells came from the West Coast to get to them. Thank you, Edward. So finally, I'm so excited to present this work by Dwayne Slick, a Meskwaki and Ho-Chunk artist who grew up in Iowa and has been a RISD professor of painting and printmaking for decades. Dwayne is also a collaborator in this exhibition and the companion exhibition, Ancestors in Place. We first began engaging with Dwayne in 2022 when we purchased a number of his prints as part of this ongoing collecting initiative. It was a truly important moment as this acquisition gave us an opportunity to recognize an important New England-based Native artist who has taught generations of students, including some very prominent Native American artists at RISD. Dwayne recognized that many of the artists were engaging in the theme of resilience and that the exhibition came from these conversations. And I love the picture to the right, which shows Edward and Dwayne looking at Dwayne's prints. And Dwayne is known for his painting that often combines aspects of modernism, such as expressive brushwork, with symbols relating to his tribal heritage. He often uses the coyote as a symbol that is both deeply important to many communities and one that is often stereotypes. And the coyote that he uses in his prints, and you'll see this in the next one as well, in kind of closer images, is actually arte populaire from Mexico. So he's also kind of playing with the coyote as a broader American, meaning beyond the borders, symbol that many, many communities find important. And as I mentioned, Dwayne helped us select the works for the show and wrote quite a few labels. But of course, he didn't write the label for his own work, which we included, crafting a consequential narrative. But he did agree that it fit the theme of resilience. And here you can see a light gray background with strong brushwork that look alternately like an abstract expressionist painting, and the more I look at it, a bit like wood grain. And the two coyotes that you can see are both kind of in profile in red and green, colors that Dwayne often employs because they are sometimes overused with respect to Native art and culture. The separate boxes and lines are meant to evoke museum display that Dwayne continues to be very interested in as he expands his curatorial practice. And the light gray plants that appear at the top and bottom of this piece is actually foxtail, a plant that has medicinal properties and also is sometimes a food source for Native Americans. This is such a wonderfully complex and layered piece. And the title refers to how certain narratives and stories are told, while others, often those of marginalized groups, do not get the same attention. And this title actually, I think what's so interesting with Edward's mentions of the COVID-19 pandemic and how many of the works reverberate from that moment, this work was actually started in 2019 and finished in 2020. And the title and this kind of meaning to it was something that came from that moment as well. One detail that has stood out to me the last few times that I've seen this print is a small band of design at the top right. It is an example of ribbon work, a kind of elaborate and culturally specific ribbon applique that both Meskwaki and Ho-Chunk women make. Ribbon work is also practiced by many other woodlands culture, but this one is specifically related to the artist's particular background. So it's a very specific symbol as well as the kind of more general ones. And so we couldn't leave you tonight without suggesting again that you go and see our very exciting Marking Resilience show, but also giving you a slight preview of the next one, Ancestors in Place, Indigenous North American Prints. So based on the same collecting initiative, but thematically around different ideas. And Indigenous peoples are often distinguished by their long ties to place in the form of origin stories, which highlight human and or non-human ancestors. And ancestors can be relatives that one remembers, like a grandmother or great-grandmother, or they can be kind of longer back, the first peoples of a tribe or nation who are named and esteemed and also remembered. Place and ancestor are deeply connected ideas, as Indigenous peoples often understand themselves to be of, not just from, a particular place. And we use place here quite intentionally because place can include bodies of water and skies, and not just the land, which is, I think, also been often used and kind of shown in a very particular way through Western art across time. Many artists consider these concepts by creating literal depictions of place or by creating images of ancestor animals, petroglyphs, relatives, or ancestral stories. And so these three works kind of give you a sense of those different variances where works can relate to ancestors, place, or both. To the far left, Petuli Susela's lovely print shows a woman holding a snowbird, and wearing an amauti parka, which is part of traditional Inuit women's clothing, yet her aesthetics have been compared to cubism with the kind of starkness of the two colors of the woman's face. And this also represents an earlier moment in our collecting of Inuit printmaking, and allows us to kind of tie what was already in the collection with our new initiative. Walla Walla artist James Lavador was one of the founders of Crow Shadow Institute of the Arts, and his piece, which is at the top right, explores the clouds near his homeland. And many of Lavador's works have this really lovely and simple aesthetic that could appear to be clouds or mountains, and are just very kind of lovely, loving brushstrokes that really think about the place that he often walks. And when I visited Crow Shadow, James Lavador came by and then promptly left again just to kind of go explore and walk around. And then finally, at the bottom, Lillian Pitt, who's a very renowned Warm Springs artist. These are actually examples of petroglyphs that have been very important to her community forever, which are understood to be made and also a form of ancestors. But this deep blue color shows them at night. So it's linking this idea of ancestors and place very deliberately and together. And I think also just speaks so beautifully to James Lavador's piece, as they've known each other for a long time and are both Oregon-based artists. So I think with that, we'll say thank you so much. I'll hand it over to my colleagues to.
Great. Thank you so much, Marina and Edward. That was great. We have a few minutes now to take questions. And as a reminder to participants, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen to ask your questions. And I'm going to start with the question, does the collecting initiative that you've been talking about include a goal of adding artworks from Native American artists from Massachusetts-based tribes?
Absolutely, and that's such a great question. In my other collecting work, that's something that I've really put an emphasis on, the Southern New England, but also kind of greater Northern New England, because our collection has not been very representative of these groups. We have been engaged with and talked to some artists that work in printmaking or kind of experimenting in printmaking, but we're always looking for new and exciting printmakers. So if you know any Indigenous Massachusetts-based artists or Wampanoag or Nipmuc and making prints, please let us know.
Yeah, it really is a great question, and it's something that Prints and Drawings feels very strongly about across its collection, and I think institutionally we do as well, that there is a real connection to ensuring that we represent our regional artists here at the MFA. And it's been such a pleasure working with Marina to think about how we embrace that. And I would just say that I think one of the most extraordinary things about this initiative so far, and I think we've brought in close on 75 to 80 works since we really initiated it about a year and a half or so ago, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, Marina, but I think we have increased the number of named Indigenous North American artists across all of the museum collections by 25% through this initiative. And as Marina said, it's also dramatically increased the geographical reach and representation of Indigenous North American artists across the country. And because prints are still very accessible in terms of their price point, we can do it relatively cheaply as well, and relatively quickly.
Great, thank you. One of our participants is asking, will the MFA be publishing photos of this exhibit with some of the comments delivered tonight? They hope so.
I don't know if that's a question for us. I think that this video will be available later. We do have a page for the exhibition, Marking Resilience, and there is information on that as well. And then one of Edward's wonderful interns has been working or was working to make sure that all of the virtual records of these prints, I think at the end of the run of the exhibition, will also be included in the web description. So if you go to our collections at MFA page, you'll be able to see some of the labels. So we are really working to think about how do we digitally preserve some of this work that we've done.
Great. One of our participants is wondering, are there other studios similar to Crow's Shadow in the US?
So maybe I'll jump in first, and then Marina, I know you have some wonderful things to say about this too. Crow's Shadow is unique. It's a pretty remarkable institution in the sense of it being the only large-scale print studio that is actually on a Native American reservation. And so the artists that oftentimes have residencies at Crow's Shadow need not necessarily be Indigenous, but a lot of them tend to be. And it has an incredible reputation among institutions and collectors and printmakers for representing Native American artists and their practice. But there are a number of other print shops, and we are determined to get to all of them in the next couple of years or so, that have had a very long-standing tradition and commitment to work with Native American artists in particular. They range from High Point in Minneapolis, which is one of the greatest print shops actually in the country. And their entire body of work is actually represented at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And it was from High Point that we acquired the large-scale works by Julie Buffalohead and Andrea Carlson. There are smaller workshops, such as Impressions in St. Louis, which ended up actually working with Dwayne Slick. And I'd say probably the other most famous one is Tamarind. And I'm going to let Marina say a few words about that, because Marina was lucky enough to visit Tamarind relatively recently.
Yes, and Tamarind's also had an interesting history in our collection. The Fritz Shoulder print that we have that Edward showed early on was actually printed at Tamarind, and it was originally based in LA. And when it moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, one of the first artists that did a residency was actually Fritz Shoulder. So in kind of their earliest iteration in New Mexico, they've been really connected to recognizing and giving residencies to Native American artists. Jean Quick-to-See Smith, an important Confederate Salish and Kootenai artist, who was recently the subject of a major Whitney exhibition and also has a wonderful piece in our show in the center, also has printed with Tamarind for a very long time. They not only make wonderful prints and have master printers, but they're connected to the University of New Mexico. And so they train many of the master printers that go on to work at places like Crow's Shadow or to work at, Impressions, different kind of print shops of varying sizes. And I think what Edward and I are excited to do in this next phase is also think about other places that are not so specifically Indigenous founded or run, but that have really deep connections. So I know, for instance, Matrix Press, has long printed works by many Indigenous American artists. And so we're really kind of broadening our thinking about regional university presses that have had these kind of deep connections.
And sometimes the presses are quite close by. So one of the most fantastic presses in the New England area is called Wingate Studio, and it's just across the border actually in New Hampshire. And they have worked over the years with quite literally many of the greatest artists. They printed a lot of Louis Bourgeois prints, for example. And they have also had a pretty strong tradition in recent years of working with Indigenous North American artists as well. So it's incredibly exciting because, as I said at the beginning, the print shops really are where the true magic happens, and the vision of the artist is materialized through oftentimes the extraordinary skill of the master printers, and the two work together side by side. There's oftentimes those moments of serendipity in the printmaking process. But these are really, really remarkable places in bringing alive the artist's vision.
Great, thank you. Does this collection include Indigenous artworks from tribes or Indigenous communities in British Columbia?
So I think we have a piece, at least one piece by a community, or sorry, by an artist who's from a British Columbia Indigenous nation. But we also, have kind of kept this initiative quite open, and also the exhibitions open, by using the term Indigenous, which is really appreciated in both Canada, even though it's not, and used in the United States kind of increasingly. So we're quite open to thinking beyond the borders. But so far we have been working with a few, with basically print shops that kind of focus on Native American artists in the US. However, many communities kind of bridge borders and cross borders. So we are also aware of that, and not kind of limiting it just to US based artists or US based communities.
Okay, we have a question that I hope this isn't putting you on the spot, but I have several Native American Indigenous artists' prints, i.e. Norval Morrisseau, etc., which I would like to donate. Is the MFA interested in acquisitions?
The MFA is always interested in acquisitions. I will say that we have a wonderful web presence about how to donate. It actually goes through a Gifts of Art department and then kind of comes to curators later. Edward, do you know what that page is called?
I will look that up and put it in the chat while I ask the next question. Can you talk about the difference between this studio movement and the Cape Dorset Inuit print studios?
Yes, that's a wonderful question. So this is obviously a bit later, as you could tell from some of the dates. The Cape Dorset and now West Baffin Cooperative has really been a leader in printmaking, kind of established in the 1950s and continuing on as a way for Inuit community members in Canada to create art, and also to collaboratively create funds for their community. And that's really exciting. This has been kind of more in the studio system. I think Edward can probably speak to this better, but there's just been, I think, since the mid-century, a growth in artists collaborating with print shops as well. So I think that Native American and First Nations artists and Indigenous artists wanting to make prints, experimenting with printmaking, parallels what's happening in the larger contemporary art world. And then I would say that for us, there's kind of different stories. So we're not trying to tell the full story of Indigenous American printmaking. We're kind of highlighting recent acquisitions, but it is a really deep and rich story. And several scholars and artists have worked on this. And I think I'll just say that the kind of book about Crow's Shadow at 25, there's a wonderful essay by Native American art historian Heather Ochtown that speaks to that too. So there's many printmaking histories kind of happening and continuing to happen. And what we're excited to do right now is kind of pick up on the ongoing history and be inspired, and also collect what's happening right now.
Yeah, I think Marina summarized it beautifully. And I think what is very exciting being in the print world is how many artists see it as an exceptionally interesting, provocative medium that pushes their own practice. And the studios, I mean, some of you actually may have seen a series of installations on the 3rd floor of the Art of Americas wing when we had the installation Women Take the Floor. And my colleague Patrick installed over a series of installations these deep dives around certain print shops that were actually founded by women printmakers. Those date back to the 60s and the 70s and had a critical role to play in the formation of contemporary art at that time. And I think what's really interesting is how, as Marina was saying today, there seems to be a quite exciting proliferation of print shops, and especially an openness to working with a much more diverse group of individuals than perhaps in the past.
Great. Well, I want to respect everybody's time. So I want to thank you, Edward, and you, Marina, for joining us tonight. And I want to thank everybody who, all our members who joined us, and look forward to seeing you in the museum, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.